Wait a second. Good morning. You're listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville, Kentucky, or streaming on artxfm.com. This is LVA's Artebella on the Radio, the show produced by Louisville Visual Art. I'm the host, Keith Waits, and today we talk to Geoff Crowe, a painter of what might be described as abstract expressionism. He works in a variety of mediums, including acrylic, watercolor, dip ink pens, charcoal, and sometimes a mix of these things. His new exhibit, Stone and Canvas in Abstract, is at Core Gallery. The reception for this exhibit, which also features the work of sculptor Mike McCarthy, who has been on our show before, is scheduled for August the 21st from 6 to 9 p.m. We are talking to Geoff today. He's actually standing in the exhibit. And I know you're hearing this first as a radio program, but he is standing in the exhibit. So we are seeing some of the work. Good morning, Geoff. How are you?
Morning. Doing well, Keith. How are you?
I'm good. So you're at Core Gallery with Mike McCarthy, which I think is an interesting pairing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's start with, so tell us, talk about the work that's in the show. What are people going to see when they come, and what does that work represent for you as an artist right now in your career?
Well, really, the first thing they're going to see is lots of color, and that really drives back to where I learned to paint, which was Puerto Rico. I'm not afraid of color. I like to use it, and in a dramatic way, which goes through all of this work. And this work is a departure for me. I've been working in the past, whether it was derby, human figures, always working off of a realism platform to the abstract. So I take a photo and paint a derby scene, the horse is running, but it would be, I push it to the abstract edges on that. Whereas this, it started out last year in the pandemic with me taking a look at where I was in the pandemic, which was at home, working in my studio, and the things around me. So I was searching for a way to bring out what I was feeling. And so I started doing sketches, and that's my process. It was hundreds of sketches of the forest around me, things that impact my life. I love to cook. I'm vegan, so that's fruit, vegetables, things like that. And as I was doing it, I started changing my direction in that instead of taking a picture and putting my stamp on it, I was trying to give you my impression of what a forest should be. Give you the impression of, I'm going to shift here for those who see this. These are some of the first ones that came out after I got bored of doing forest scenes. There's only so much you can do. So I started doing the fruits and the vegetables, and my personal stamp was bringing in shapes into it, the geometric shapes that would have an impact on your eye, along with the colors to make your eye flow through the painting, and hopefully in a pleasing way. So sometime late last year, I said, okay, great, love it, but let's scrap this because I'm just working with shapes. So why don't I even just step right off of that, and instead of doing an orange with a triangle behind it, why not just do a circle with a triangle behind it and use the colors that I want to use without any basis to what a quote unquote fruit should look like. And so it's shapes and colors that make your eye flow. It's not the idea that I'm looking at a piece of fruit. So, from the ones that, for those who are watching, they were fruits to these ones, which are much more expansive in color and direction and shape. So that's a long answer, as short as I can make it, as to what you'll see.
Well, and so I see from what when you've panned around there that some of the pieces are also, I've been able to look at your website recently and see some of those same pieces, like that bok choy piece. And so it's interesting what you're talking about, because what I was seeing before we came to do the interview, when I was reviewing the work, was, there's a lot of your work is just purely abstract, but these representational elements there's a nice tension, and I think tension is very important in work. I think the stuff that we really remember, there's often a tension between elements or themes or whatever is going on. It's a nice tension between the abstract and the sort of flatness and these representational objects, which are trying to have depth, and they do have some depth, but you're not painting them in a way that it doesn't seem like usually you're trying to paint the depth. You're, like you say, you're seeing them as shapes. So it seems like that you were sort of you were on a journey as you went through this work, and that journey, I guess, is going to be reflected on the walls. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if it's, I mean, I think it's true with all artists. You can see their move from one area to the other. And if somebody had seen my work, which was planned for last year, the human figures, I had started moving these geometric forms into the back of the figures. So you'd have a figure in front of you on the painting with these forms. And again, my idea, call it tension, was to have your eye shift and flow through the figure and the painting. And again, that's what I've tried to do here. Sometimes it worked great, so.
Well, there's also a really interesting visual or surface texture. With that one right in front of me, I'm not exactly sure which word I would choose, but that sort of mottled quality that seems consistent through your work. Talk about what that is and how you've come to paint that way.
It's interesting because I think there's a couple of factors there. One, I did a lot of work in ceramics, and so my ceramic work that I did was extremely textural. I literally would take a stick as I was forming it and just whack the sides of the pieces I was building. So they had all these lines etched through them. So, and again, I'm sorry for the listeners, but I'm turning around to show a painting and bringing it in. You can literally see, in a way, I've done the same thing. My new work, all of this has been using small squeegees. And by small, I mean everything from the size of a phone to little tiny guys. Now, tiny guys I don't use much in paintings these size.
Right.
But literally, I scrape the paint on, and a lot of times just smack the edges on the paint so they're very textural. And that's one thing I try and tell people. My wife is always saying, "Oh, you've got to see this in person," because the photo just does not put it across. It's very textural. And in the newer stuff, Don, the owner of Core, was talking about how it's almost looks like a fabric with the lines on it.
But that's interesting that it comes from ceramics, because that's what I was thinking, that it had a sort of, because I played with clay in art school. I never became a ceramic artist, but it's so much fun because you can impose different textures on clay in an interesting way. And so to see you take that to the canvas, to take a specific, what I thought of as a specifically three-dimensional technique to a two-dimensional form, that's really fascinating. But that's what I thought it looked like, is that it looked like some sort of stucco wall or something. It was that was how it looked to me, and it's very fascinating. And it seems individual. I don't right away, certainly in the Louisville community, it seems unique.
Thank you. Thanks. And I think it also goes back, and this could be tied back to the textual part or not to the textual, that's what we're talking about, but to the ceramic part. But again, I'm not sure it really is, because one of the things that I like about my work, or what I try to put across, is pushing and pulling of the forms. And in the individual colors, I like to do that. And this allows me to do that. it gives, so if I'm working with a band of orange, and I'm looking at one of my paintings I'm talking about, if I'm working with a band of orange, yeah, sure, I can do a soft band of orange, but I want that color to be alive. I want it to have a feeling that it's more than just a band of orange, that it's, it's got some lights, some depth, some, some edges to it, and I want it to lose some of its edges. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. So, let me touch on this. I'm always fascinated by how artists will move from one medium to the other and make choices. About some artists become dedicated to one medium and seem to stay with it for a long time. I was just talking to Julio Cesar last week, and it's all about the paint for him and a very intense relationship with paint. But you were a ceramic artist who moved to becoming a painter. What was it that happened? What pulled you there?
Well, I'm actually going to correct that a little bit. I was a dual artist. I was creating, at the same time that I was creating paintings, I was doing ceramics. So they were running parallel to each other. When I moved back from Puerto Rico, one of the first things I did was buy myself a kiln. So it was up and running with me since about 2005. And so it was going in a parallel course, which, it's funny because I was thinking about this morning. It's a good thing and bad thing in that it allowed me to go two directions, and they absolutely impacted each other, as we just talked about. But when I decided 2 years ago to let the ceramic go, mainly because I closed down the studio I had, I moved it in-house, and there's just not a place for a kiln where I live. I focus much more on my painting. And so I feel like it's what that letting that piece go, it's what allowed me to move on farther with my painting in the last year than I'd done. I mean, if you looked back, you'd see figures. I mean, the very first work I did was soccer players, kids playing soccer in Puerto Rico. They loved it. My first show, talk about setting up bad expectations. My first show sold every piece but one. So anyway, so I did figures, and I did it from photos. I went to my nieces and nephews' soccer games, and back then this was rolls. I took about 20 rolls of film and came back and developed it, pulled the best shots that I liked, and then went and painted from these. So, again, I was doing my representation of a photo that I had taken. Well, that was what I've been doing for years. And so last year when I said, okay, we need to make a change. I don't want to go out and take photos of this forest. This is the first stage. I want to say, what do I want a forest to be to me that I can show you? And so I went from doing, not copying, but using a photo as my medium, my base, using a model per se, to creating it in my head and saying, what do I want this to be? And that change, that piece right there was probably the biggest step for me in 20 years of painting.
Say the name of the piece that you're talking about is, what was what's the name of the piece you're talking about? You're referring to a specific piece?
No.
Development.
I'm referring to my whole technique.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, sorry. So I've been working off of photos and said, I don't need to be doing that anymore. I need to create it in my mind and just put it on the canvas and say, that's a forest, for example.
So you spend time in the forest and absorb it into your mind and then go to the studio. Exactly.
As close as it can be. And it was like that with every other piece. I said, okay, I'm now going to do lines. So I'm going to pivot here for a second. So instead of saying, well, I'm going to do a lime, I'm like, forget just doing a lime. I'm going to do 30 of them. and they're floating in space. So, you know, their quantity becomes as important as the individual. So it's, you know, that was kind of the first stage of it. I didn't have to set up 3 lines on a table and say, okay, that's what I'm going to paint. It was like, okay, and the bok choy. I didn't have bok choy. I just said, well, I know roughly what bok choy looks like.
Okay.
So, you know.
But you could have had bok choy. You chose not to. So it's getting to the idea of like, it's sort of like the concept of bok choy or carrots or lime.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you didn't actually have 30 limes in your studio like in that paint.
No, good God, no.
Well, you could have had a party or something after that. But anyway,
well, that's why it's called margaritas.
Right. So I was also thinking about, and now it seems like the work in the guy right now. You know, I always look when artists are paired in an exhibit. Like, is there a relationship? Like, so is there a relationship between you and Mike? Are you doing this because you are just friends? Did Don put you together, or do you think there's a relationship in the work that that you guys were thinking about?
So the basic answer is Don put us together. Mm-hmm. My addendum to that is he couldn't have picked a better artist to put me with, because his work, and that's why we sat down and said, well, what are we going to call this show? And that's what we came up with was, you know, stone and canvas in abstract. I mean, we both are doing the same kind of thing. You know, the figure behind me, that's a figure. But the one in the corner, I'm going to turn you all the way around, you know.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece. And so it's abstract.
Well, and I think a lot of Mike's work that I've seen over the years, when we talked about that tension in some of your work between abstract and representationalism, it's I think you find that in some of Mike's work too, that you'll see an abstract piece that a face emerges from or something like that. So you see some of that same sort of balance of things in his work, I think.
Yeah, and you really do have to come into the gallery, because it really is a beautiful show. I mean, the way that Don has put the pieces together, you want to look at everything. It's like being in a home. You look through and you're like, okay, somebody thought about why this is in the corner, how this works together. It really is a beautiful show.
Well, did you find that once the show was put together and Mike's work was next to yours, are those relationships making you think differently about your own work or these particular pieces? Are you seeing things you didn't really see or understand before?
Not really. No.
Okay.
I just look at them and just see how they work well together, if that makes sense. To me, there's a balance between the 3-dimensional search and creativity and my 2-dimensional. You can see how and why the two have been brought together, if that makes sense.
Sure. Well, and I can't help but I want to emphasize again what you're saying, which is a very common thing. If anybody actually listens to this show every week, they've heard me say it a million times now, but it is absolutely true. Like I will encourage everybody to go to your website and check out the work, geoffreycrowe.com, and that's Jeffrey with a Geoff. It's
actually studiocrowe.com.
Studio Crowe. I'm sorry. Yes, Studio. I see. Yeah, studiocrowe.com. CROWE. Got to get the E.
And if you go to the newest section, it'll be an interesting step for you to see prior to the show, because it has the steps I went through to get to what this show is. Mm-hmm. So you will see the fruits, the vegetables. You'll see one painting of the forest that actually made it out of the drawing stage. And then you'll see when I made a step from the fruit to taking it very geometric. I did black backgrounds with the shapes. And then you'll see when I start to move into what is the current show. So there's a lot more happening on the website that kind of gives you a history to how and why I got to this show.
Right. But we want that website to point people to visit the gallery, because as you were talking before, the no digital image, no matter how well it's shot, captures the texture. These are two-dimensional pieces, but the texture, the surface, the impact of being in space with it, and of course these relationships we're talking about within the gallery, and the way things have been set up. But I cannot say that enough. Even artists who are creating digital images, it's different when you go in the gallery. It's always you need to be in the space.
It's like watching a movie on your TV versus going and seeing it in a movie theater.
Right. Of course, there at least you don't have to listen to somebody talking or using their cell phone next to you. That's my beef now. But you know, and I also say, just in case anybody's, you know, I don't want to proselytize too much, but in case anybody's feeling a little concerned about Delta variant, all through the pandemic, galleries of course closed when everything else shut down, but I have maintained that going to a gallery, now whether or not you choose to go to an opening reception, and maybe you have reasons why you don't want, you're immunocompromised, whatever, but you and whoever you are you know, with in your bubble, a gallery experience I think has always been the one cultural experience that could be accomplished through the pandemic. You and a friend masked in a gallery, moving through the space. You know, the typical traffic in a gallery is not so busy or full that you would feel at risk in it. So I've always thought that, you know, while theater and performing arts and all these other things, you're definitely taking a different level of risk, but a gallery visit seems entirely reasonable to me. But let's get back to, you were talking about the journey you've had so you were working, you were still putting objects of some kind in your images, and you sort of moved to this place where you're all abstract or almost totally abstract. So what do you think is next then for your development? Like, maybe you're already doing that, maybe you're painting things already that aren't in the show. Like, are you sticking with that, or are you following that trend right now?
Yeah, so you know, part of winding down from getting a show up is taking a breath and doing all those things that, you know, my wife needed me to do while I was getting the show ready. So, which is good, because it gives me a chance to step back and ask the question you just asked. What are you doing next? What do you want to do next? And one of the things I'm playing with is, can I do what I've created here, but multidimensionally? So I've started to look at, what about doing, instead of like what's behind me, a diptych, what about using 12 canvases, 12 8x8 canvases, so that the importance of the, you know, the shape I've created behind me is actually created in the shape of the canvas. And now, so your eye flows, it adds another piece to it. So I'm looking at that. That's what I'm doing. And my process is taking sticky notes and drawing colors on sticky notes that I have. So, and looking at it and going, oh Lord, that does not work. But that's my process. I just try this. I work it and say, does this work? And you may talk to me in 2 weeks, and I'm back to just creating more images along this line. But who knows?
Well, experimentation is very important. It's a very important part of any artist's life, I think. You know, if you're not always pushing yourself and trying something new, why are you an artist?
Right.
That's
right.
The nature of the thing.
Exactly.
So this show at Core runs through the end of August?
The end of August, yes. The 28th, I believe.
Right. Okay. Do you have other exhibition opportunities lined up right now that you
do not? My focus.
Okay. All right. So I'll just say again, we're talking to Geoff Crowe and his show, s- Stone plus Canvas. Abstract.
Stone and Canvas.
Stone
in
and Canvas Abstract. With Mike McCarthy is up right now at Core Gallery, and your reception is going to be August 21st, the artist reception,
Right.
from 6 to 9 p.m.
Correct.
And Core is a nice big space too for people to spread out.
Yeah, so for those, and I'm not going to walk too much, I'm going to go the center of my gallery space,
Right.
my and Mike's. And if you look over my shoulder, you can see how far back this goes.
Right. Yeah.
So, which is way back for those that are not here visually, that's about 200 at least feet, I think.
Yeah.
So 3 long rooms.
It should be fine. So
Yeah.
I'll ask you this one last question.
Okay.
So just to give Mike McCarthy a little time here, but so what's your favorite Mike McCarthy piece in there? Or am I putting you on the spot?
You know, like everything, that's a hard one to say. I like the ones that actually are directly around me. So
The little ones.
yeah, and I'm really bad at this, but yeah. And the one that was where I had the,
Right.
I mean, it's cool. This one is called African Wood Wonderstone Life Balance. Actually, it's called Life Balance, and I believe it's African Wonderstone. That's what it's carved on.
So has Mike told you what your favorite piece or his favorite piece of yours is?
No, but actually, fascinating story about Mike. Mike is colorblind. So yeah, so for Mike, he's looking at, he sees some colors. So the forms for him were very dramatic in my show. That's why he really liked it, because he can see all these. Whereas in other shows, they're much more muted because of the blending of the colors, which I don't blend. So, anyway.
Well, you're blending, there's some blend of tone, like within each color. There's a little, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I get what you're saying, how each shape or area is like dominant. It's this is sort of a yellow ochre, and this is sort of a blue. I don't know what you would call that blue. And I'm actually looking at bushel on your website when I'm talking about that. And that green. So yeah.
You're absolutely right. There are no hard lines. This is not a pure geometric form. I mean, the forms are pure, but the edges are soft.
Right.
So.
Okay. Well, Geoff, thank you so much for taking the time today. So again, Geoff Crowe, work at Core Gallery, opening on August 21st. Can't say it enough. The opportunity you can go to the gallery other times, but if you want the opportunity to meet and talk to the artists involved, August 21st is that opportunity. So thanks so much for taking the time today, man.
Keith, thank you. Appreciate it. You have a good day.
You too.